And good morning.
Good morning.
Here we are. I'm Ani.
I'm
and
Teresa.
with Teresa. We're a couple minutes late. We had some technical issues. What can you call them? Technical issues.
So there.
Getting going this morning. There were issues, and they technically affected me. There we go. So that said, rather than delay another moment, Teresa is going to talk to you for a minute, and I'm going to wander off.
All right.
And we can always, you can stall for time. Play with the toy for a minute.
Oh, I think I'll just plow.
You're going to launch? Okay.
People can always rewind, can't you? Hi, John. Good morning. Good to see you here. This being the end of the year, I thought I'd talk about considerations of the previous year, but I never liked those end of the year programs where they tell you what you already knew about the year. I mean, sometimes they remind you of something that happened in January and you've forgotten about or what have you, but I thought it would be more interesting to talk about what has happened in 23 because I see it as a seminal year and I would like to know what those seeds are going to grow into. And so this is a prediction, but a bit of a projection. Good morning, Ted. And Ani will be here shortly. So I want to talk about what these things point to. I want to talk about the opportunity. It's like everyone got to participate a little bit because the Starbucks strike, for example, or the Chipotle strikes and the Amazon strike were affected people across the nation. You got to see the Starbucks workers do their thing. And by golly, there seem to be barking spiders in here. We knew that was an element of our podcast. We'll try to get some representations shortly. In the auto unions also, we saw just tremendous efforts moving forward. And now the question is not can they organize the big three, but can that move forward in the coming year into Toyota and other corporations operating in the U.S. in the same scale or close as the big three used to back in the 70s and 80s. So, pardon me. That's pretty exciting. And the exciting thing for me is finally seeing people realize that they don't have a chance without a union. This has been true for a long time. We don't have a chance of just asking the boss, especially after decades of post-Reagan anti-worker ideology. You don't have a chance of getting a living wage, of getting rational wealth distribution into the society at large by asking for it. They're not going to give it to you. They would consider themselves, when I say they, I mean the 1%, the boss class, the elite class, would consider themselves stupid for giving it to you. They consider themselves superior, and little people like you don't matter and they won't deal with you until they absolutely have to, which is why unions are so essential. And I remember in years past, the first thing I would hear is like, oh, unions are corrupt. I mean, this is what people were trained to say by the aforementioned, Reagan counter-revolution. So this is a very encouraging thing. And I wanted to start off with something that was positive, something to look forward to in the coming years. People are waking up to the fact that it's by working with each other through a union. Union is just a very humane and communitarian thing to do, form a union. So I'm really glad to see it happen. But the thing that's hanging over everything is the brutal extermination going on in Gaza. And I have, especially in the last few weeks, I've gone from crying over it to being absolutely disgusted with what remains of Israel after this. Israel, like U.S., has been contaminated horribly by some very negative thinking. And here in the U.S., I was talking about post-Reagan and the fascist thinking of the Trump camp, horrible enough. But it hasn't infiltrated policy quite as thoroughly as the Kahanist thinking did in Israel. And there was a time when if you called someone a Kahanist in Israel, I mean, from what I understand, from what people have told me, it was viewed as an insult. And Meir Kahane, Rabbi Meir Kahane was considered a grotesquely extreme person, and he was a racist. And what they are doing in Gaza is the most horrible form of exterminationist racism. And it's terrifying, especially for someone like me as, well, not only as a, an Untermensch class, as a transgender woman, but as someone who studies World War II, this sort of thinking was very common then. We often point to the Germans, but the Japanese also did it, and the Americans did it. And this is reflected in some of the decisions. I won't say that they didn't have any military effect, but there were deliberate and racist tinged decisions to wipe out whole populations. For example, the firebombing of Tokyo in 1945 was intended to exterminate people, and it really did on a huge scale. Like 100,000 people were exterminated in a firebombing raid using B-29s. B-29s had been built for bombing from high altitude. They went in at low altitude and risked the lives of the crews of those B-29s, took out their defensive armament just to make sure that they could exterminate as many people as possible. And they killed more in that strike than died in Hiroshima or than died in Nagasaki. And the Japanese were doing the same thing. They had decided that the Americans were subhumans and most often compared to guerrillas, and that the best thing for them to do was to exterminate Americans. And they had that moving forward. I know I've mentioned it over the last year, but I want to mention it again because it's hidden. And I want to bring it up is this sort of exterminationist thinking spreads, and it's horrible when people find excuses for it. And what they planned to do, what they actually had moving forward under the sea was a gigantic submarine, which had aircraft on it. And the aircraft were loaded with 1,800-pound bombs. And in the bombs was bubonic plague. And that was what they had planned for the American people, for the entire West Coast. They planned to kill millions of us through the bubonic plague. And that's one reason why you never heard about those submarines. They were sunk. They didn't want anyone looking for where they were sunk because they, it's 80 years now, I suppose, those bubonic plague vaccine. I don't know that for certainty. But that's how dangerous it was. And that's where that sort of exterminationist thinking leads. And Israeli society, as it is right now, I know that there are plenty, what's actually moving forward, what the U.S. was doing to the Vietnamese during the height. And it's exterminationist thinking. We have to look at that squarely, and we have to call it what it is. And so I would say that unfortunately, that aspect of 2023 is going to be projected forward into 2024. We're certainly not stopping their war, and the U.S. isn't stopping providing them with 2,000-pound bombs, which is also disgusting. And it's hard to get anyone to even talk straight about it in Washington. It's like they seem to be zombies when you ask the Democratic Party about this. Most of them will just take the attitude of, well, look over there. So unfortunately, that's going to be worsening. And over the next year, of course, we can expect the continuation of the 2023 El Nino phenomenon. It's still happening. It's worsening. As a matter of fact, it's projected to be worse over the next year. And so I would remind you that what we saw last year were many warming catastrophes stacked up. There was choking smoke from the Canadian forests, which drifted all over the East Coast, went to New York. There was a tropical storm that hit California, an astonishing thing. There were many severe floods, and there were very strong floods simply from cloudbursts all over the world, smaller in area but intense in effect. There were glacial floods that killed thousands. And we know now that the methane that has been released from Siberia and from the clathrates in the ocean is now increased to the point that it is self-sustaining. And so this is what used to be called the clathrate gun or the methane gun. This is underway and will become much worse. And I don't want to take the attitude that it's all over or nothing can be done. But I will take the attitude of it doesn't matter how well you recycle at this point in terms of what's going to happen with the ongoing and unstoppable global warming. It's past the trigger point of self-sustaining, is now accelerating, and the only possible survival strategies that we have now are what used to be considered utterly insane and are still utterly insane geoengineering strategies. Which is not to say that you shouldn't do what you can. You should recycle, but that's not going to stop it. And pointing at other people for their automobile use or whatever is not particularly useful at this point. We need to have massive changes. We need to nationalize big oil before we have a chance of, for one thing, having the cash to convert the economy to stop the increasing oil emissions, carbon emissions, and to do that in geoengineering that will save our lives, hopefully, maybe.
Well, and I think one of the, as you say, to nationalize oil is an important thing. It feels like, Mexico went a giant step backwards with their gas industry a couple of administrations ago. To nationalize utilities seems like a really good idea, right? We have excuse me, there's my technical issue starting up again. We have if we have need, that's where I'm going with this. If we have need for a particular service, then I think that it only makes sense. If a service is necessary for it to then be nationalized, so it can be, a service for the people instead of private gain. And then we wouldn't maybe have things like more lobbyists for the oil industry at the climate summit than we do actual delegates from countries that are being threatened, their very existence being threatened by climate changes. That's, I think that we could, in fact, nationalize all utilities, not just the oil industry, but also looking at telecommunications and communication platforms like this.
Oil deals going on at COP28. I mean, how arrogant is that? I mean, the fact that they're holding it in an oil-producing country.
Well, and they've been holding it in oil-producing countries, but in fact, they're holding it in countries where the right to protest are thoroughly curtailed. And I think that's something that they have learned over the years, because there had been vibrant global protests about climate change prior to them being held in, is it this year, Qatar? Dubai. And last year in Egypt.
Yeah. So, I mean, they know that it's bogus. They're perfectly confident, playing their little game on the COP, and next year will be the COP29 stage. They have absolutely no intention of doing anything but bamboozling us. And they will not have any fear until we begin to seize them, until one national interest after another begins to take their funds on the basis of the terrible corruption and the threat that they face, the threat that they represent to humanity. So there's, war has been boiling over this past year, and there are naval strike groups in the Mediterranean, Persian Gulf, and in the Red Sea surrounding Iran. And that has been cranking up. There have been provocations moving forward. Israel, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, has been, was caught throwing phosphorus into Lebanon, a terrible provocation, intentionally anti-civilian action. The U.S. has been doing things like attacking a Iranian militia group with a spooky, which is, I need to describe a little bit of the technical details of this for you to understand how obnoxious it is. A spooky is a C-131, a big transport aircraft. And it's an aircraft that can easily be shot down by modern, even shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, the type that follow the first heat source, or that follow heat source plus the vibration of the plane, that sort of thing. And I say that because, the first pushback you'll get when you say that with military types is, oh, they have countermeasures. Well, they don't work if you have any decent, if the people that you are shooting at are not poor, is where I'm going with this. So they found a militia that was not well, they didn't have anything stronger than RPGs and machine guns, a couple dozen people. And they put this thing, this gigantic plane into a bank, and they circled around them. And what they do is they open up a huge panel on the side, and it has the most grotesque electrically operated, high-powered machine guns and even cannon. And they, shoot until there's nothing left but little bitty pieces. And this is a way of giving the middle finger to Iran, saying that, we have suppressed anti-aircraft fire, and you're still too poor to shoot down our huge war machines. That sort of thing is going to make things worse. And I think that I can see a war with Iran breaking out. It seems to me like they're trying really hard to make that happen at this point. China is preparing for a massive air and sea assault on Taiwan. There's no denying it. You hear comments to the effect of, oh, they don't have a modern Navy, that sort of thing. That doesn't matter. Modern in the sense of what a lot of people are saying is no longer relevant. If you can get anything floating with a large enough anti-ship missile on it, then it's more effective than a battleship would have been in 1945. They have what they need to take the island by force, and they've been saying that they will. And it appears that they will. I would not be surprised at all if they do this in the coming year. North Korea says that they are preparing for warfare, and if they are, instead of just blustering like they usually are, then it would probably be in combination with the Chinese attack on Taiwan. So that would be a massive conflagration in the Far East. Then we come back home, and we see that the Trump campaign has been steaming forward despite trials and removals because they thrill their frankly racist white male base by teasing dictatorship. And I'm not saying that white males are racist. I'm saying that these white males are racist. And they, the small base that they have is extremely enthusiastic, extremely well connected, consists of a great number of military and cops, is in the courts, in the government, and they're just as well connected as you would expect aging white males to be. So they represent a threat much greater than their demographic size, and they know it. And they think that maybe they can take full control of the nation in spite of democracy, and they're going to try. And this is our fate. This is what we're looking at in 2024. This is going to happen this coming year. And whether they succeed is going to depend on all of us fighting back in many ways. Ideologically, certainly, we have to push back on their ideology, but we have to do it in a way that gets the attention of the great middle third of people who have never picked up a newspaper, will not look at news on the web, and only get their news maybe from comedians, if they get any at all, and who will vote on the basis of, as they used to say in the time of the election of Reagan, who they think they'd maybe like to have a beer with, and other considerations that have nothing to do with actual policy and actual facts on the ground. So we have to deal with that. We have to get these people's attention. Democracy is damn near anti-democracy. It's a mockery of democracy, and it's that way because it's the elites that we've been pushing back against since voting was instituted in this country have various and very effective ways of manipulating us and from preventing us from having the information that we need to actually actuate democracy. And so we have some catch-up work to do on that. So that's my prediction, if you want to call it that. It's not prediction, but that's my projection for 2024. That's what I'm looking at in terms of what's likely to happen over the next year or so on the basis of all of these events in 2023.
All right. I want to apologize for the sound cutting on and off this morning. I have wiggle wall wires. I have checked our connections. I think perhaps the internet is having the same problem as my sinuses. In other words, it's all jammed up. I checked our speeds, our internet speeds just now. Let's just say they're abysmal. And I'll be speaking with our provider later. Thank you for, in fact, hanging out and being with us. And I hope that most of what we're saying is intelligible. Um, so I just wanted to go ahead and add that against a backdrop of a whole lot of things that are kind of dire and kind of terrible, we have an interesting thing happening, and that is the New York Times is reporting that there is a record drop in homicides this year.
Hmm.
That Detroit's homicide rate, in fact, is the lowest that it has been in 60 years. Nearly 60 years. Uh, Apparently, about the last time Detroit's homicide rate was this low was the year of my birth, 1966. And so, what does this mean? The Times reported that Philadelphia's homicide rate has dropped 20% this year. And that there's, oh, sneeze. I am so sorry. I really try not to do that in front of cameras. Okay. That there's been an overall decrease in gun violence across the whole country. That levels of gun violence are higher, still remain higher than they were at just before the start of the pandemic. The pandemic sharply increased a lot of aggression, a lot of crime. It kind of took social supports the heck out, and things have been a little wonky. We know that, over the last 3 years. But here we are. They are starting, those crime rates are coming back down. Motor vehicle theft is the only one of 9 violent or property crimes that have been tracked by the FBI that has actually increased this year. So that's motor vehicle theft. Everything else is stable or dropping.
And as Jabara says, not in Portland, that's true. But there are special reasons for that.
Well, there's only a couple of cities. I wasn't able to find statistics on Portland specifically from the time that this article came out early this morning. The one city that they have seen a difference in, that is, homicides are continuing to increase and things are sort of spiraling, is Washington, D.C. That seems to be a very notable exception. But even in Chicago, homicides are down 13%. In New York City, homicides are down 11%. And shootings are down 25%. Those are 2 cities that Trump is calling crime dens in his recent speeches and his campaign speeches. And so we think that when this is going on, who's benefiting? Who's benefiting from the narrative? Because to watch evening news, you think that, in fact, crime is spiraling out of control across the country. So who's benefiting from that narrative? That's my big question. Who's benefiting, I believe, are the right-wing politicians and the people that want ever more budget to lock us up and throw away the key. There was a news item on KPTV that I watched this morning, and that is a man was killed by the Portland cops who apparently was shoplifting at a Target at Mall 205. And I have only checked this. I have only seen this article, so we have not really looked into it. But from what the news announcers said, kind of seems like a guy was shoplifting at Target, and then he ran from the store and was running across the parking lot where he was confronted by 5 cop cars who seemed to be waiting for something to go down. And they pursued him and they shot him. And then they found a gun near his body, which kind of, gotta say, sounds a lot like a throwdown to justify cop killing. No one actually in that article said the guy was firing at the cops. The cops have not actually said that. They said that it's too early. They are just beginning their investigations. They're not sure what happened.
And as I was saying earlier, if someone was firing at the cops, they absolutely will tell you straight up that they were returning fire. And so what they said was that shots were fired. And there was a picture of it looked to me like the lock punched out on a trunk of a cop car. I don't know if that was from a gunshot, but of course we don't know if it was from a gunshot, whether it was from the cops, which is often the case. But evidently there were quite a number of cops outside. I imagine reacting to previous media coverage of shoplifting at that Target. They chased this guy. They put it in passive voice, said they located a gun. They located
a gun
gun?
close to the body
and they photographed it in black and white.
because
they
there
said-
might have been blood on the.
Yeah, and they've shown blood before, so what's that about?
There's a whole lot of about this story, and yes, I think that in fact having a country fearful helps the conservatives tremendously. The party of law and order that don't think laws apply to them tends to get a lot of positive results from horrifying news, from amplifying the fear in the base. And we know that, we've seen it going back a long way as I first became aware of it in the Willie Horton campaigns in, Bush the Elder. So,
Willie Horton, I hadn't thought of that for a while.
right. But it's really, law and order, things are wild. People are wild in the streets. And that's usually, people who probably are people of color or, the new villain in every local news narrative, people who are forced to sleep in tents outside. And so really, I think it's important to start questioning the reporting again when it comes to crime, to think about who that benefits, to never stop thinking about who that benefits, and to actually try to get a handle on what's happening in our own backyards without looking at the news. I get it. When we have people who have no social services in the streets, when we have people who are not being able to access health care or addiction care or mental health care, that really is a frightening place for our society to be. But what's the answer to that? Law and order, lock them all up, throw away the key, more repression? No, it's not the answer to that. So let's keep looking for serious solutions to very complex problems.
Another thing that has happened in 2023 and in previous years, and it's just getting worse, is the fact that, utilities have pretty much doubled. Rent has tripled. And the Biden administration is trying to make hay with their announcement that wages are up over some period of time, like, what was it, 16%? Which is great, except that when your utilities are up 200% and your rent is up 300%, and it's taken up all your paycheck, then your reaction to wages are up 16% is whoop-de shit. You're still not catching up. You're still not able to make your college costs are up 10 times what they were when I was going to college. And so this is not addressing, this is deliberately obfuscating the fact that much of the population, half of the population, something like that, has been impoverished, pauperized by these conditions, and wages have not kept up. And if wages are not going to be legislated to be higher, then rents have to be legislated to be lower, and mortgages. And these are things that can be done. These are similar to things that have been done at the national level. Nixon froze wages and prices in the 70s during the oil crisis.
Right. So there are things that we could be doing that we have not been doing.
Yeah, and there are things that
And
we seem
we
to
have-
dare not think about.
And we have not been doing them because, in fact, it might piss off the owning class.
Yeah. So
Yeah, we need to become far more emboldened. And when I say we, I mean Democrats. I don't really often align myself with Democrats, but currently, near as I have seen, we are in power in the executive branch, and we have a very slim, call it one, maybe two people majority in the Senate.
Yeah.
And so why are we not seeing more actual proposals that will help the impoverished country, that will guarantee some housing, that will freeze some prices, that will actually help inflation, not by jacking interest rates which honestly is not helping anyone trying to buy a house, right? So what, again, looking at real solutions, what is the Democratic Party afraid of?
And they
Oh,
have the tools right
pissing
there.
off corporate rule.
Yeah.
I know.
They have the tools right there. They have the Sherman Antitrust Act. I'm looking at Amazon. I mean, that's just right there in front of us and isn't being enforced.
Yeah. So here's to bolstering allies in the new year. Here's to seeing clearly what is happening. And here's to adding strength to the labor movement, which is a really bright spot. I'm stoked about that. Here's to the labor movement. I was excited to see Sean Fain standing along with several congressional leaders calling for a strong ceasefire and making the connections between a world at war and a war against the workers. And I think that we need to see more of those kinds of connections being laid out starkly, especially in terms of aggregating political power. So, thanks for that. And I think at this point, do you want to just sort of pivot into?
Let's pivot.
We have a lot to keep our eyes on in this coming year, and we do it best by staying together. Sorry about the technical issues of the internet. Before we went on, I was joking about having technical issues with my allergies this morning, which are just kind of out of control. But it's not an uncommon thing. I just usually manage to forestall it on Fridays. We're not sure how. But thank you very much for bearing with us and staying through all of that. This is now Bridge to a Better World. I am Ani Raven. This is Teresa Mitchell, my beloved spousal unit. And we bring you this live stream every Friday morning at 9. And we end it with some information, inspiration for the community. And I just want to, and a tarot reading. And so, what I want to say is, as we watch the flip of the Gregorian calendar, if you didn't celebrate the solstice as the new year, then the Gregorian calendar flip may be for you. When we get to a point where our society recognizes an end of a cycle and a beginning of a new cycle, those are really powerful times as people focus on casting out the old and bringing in the new. I like to do that on solstice. I also like to do it on the Gregorian calendar flip. I don't have a lot of, I think that Gregor was an interesting guy, mathematically more accurate than previous folks who have tried to make a solar calendar. That's great. I don't have a lot of connection to the Gregorian calendar, right? It is what it is. We have decided it is the thing, so we do it. And so on Sunday night, we can say goodbye to 2023, kiss it gently and send it on its merry way.
You kiss it.
And bring in 2024 with all the hopes that we can muster, with dreaming deeply about what it is we want to bring in. I'm going to say that we are in a waning, I'm sorry. Yes, we are in a waning moon cycle for Sunday night. And that means it's a great time to let things go. And let's think about everything we want to leave behind us, insecurities, fears, angers, all of that. We can sort of try to refresh ourselves and go forward into 2024 with a clean slate. And when I say clean slate, what I mean is to try to really unpack some of the habits that hold us back and to leave those behind us. And so the cards, what do the cards say? The cards say we have the Knight of Swords inversed. Oh, we have the Four of Cups or Four of Bowls in this particular deck. And we have the Star. And so putting all of that together, it's really important to check yourself. check yourself for ideas of, sometimes we um, are so sure of our ideas, we don't care about other people who we might be engaged in a good argument with. So the Knight of Swords tells us to really look within um, before we go outwards, before we turn our anger outwards, before we charge forth with ideas, before we uh, before we lead ourselves into battle, to check in with ourselves, and to really see if our perceptions, to double check our perceptions, to maybe it's time to phone a friend and to triple check our perceptions before we go forth and wage our opinions before we drive forth with our ideas. Just make sure you're on solid ground. That's what the Knight of Swords in verse means. Make sure you're on solid ground. Check in with yourself and make sure you're not just lashing out of anger. The Four of Cups really is talking about uh, disappointment, dealing with disappointment, and maybe, in fact, uh, enshrouding yourself in disappointment to the point that you're missing really good things that are being handed to you. It is the idea that uh, you may be carrying with you that nothing is working, nothing's even worth an effort, and you're missing the beauty that is, in fact, right in front of you. You're missing the opportunities that are there because of this carrying through the disappointment of the past. So check your anger. Let go of anger, especially as we turn that calendar. See if anger is not separating you from actual opportunities that are there for you right now. And we end with the Star card, and the Star card talks about opening your intuition and knowing that the universe is directing you in a good way, that you can see signs around you that will, in fact, point you in the direction you need to go. And it's a very, very encouraging sign for the coming year. Be guided by the beauty of the world around you. Be guided by going towards connection. Be guided by your intuition. May it remain open so you have true sight, so you can, in fact, read what's going on around you in a good and accurate way and take advantage of the gifts of the universe that are being offered. That's what I have.
Excellent.
And so, ever so sorry that YouTube is glitching. Yeah, don't know what to say about that. Thank you so much for bearing with us.
Yeah, thanks for sticking it out.
And please do hit the like button if you can find it. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe to our channel. We got 2 new subscribers last week. I was chuffed. Keep spreading the word and keep being a brilliant, wonderful community. Thank you so much for existing. Thank you so much for being there.
All the ships at sea. Bye-bye.